Hi, good night everyone, Richard Wong here. So today we are going to look at another flagship camera from Panasonic. It is the Panasonic GH5S. To keep this review short, and I'm assuming a lot of you are already quite familiar with the Panasonic GH5, I'm not going to go through every single feature of the GH5S, otherwise it will make this review super long. I'll briefly talk about some of the key features that's inherent from the GH5, but I will mainly focus on the new feature changes and surprisingly some of the downgrade when compared to the GH5. The GH5S has a magnesium alloy body that is freeze-proof, splash-proof, and also dust-proof, just like the original GH5. If you look at the two bodies side by side, the GH5S here and the GH5, they look almost identical. The body style, the button layout, the size, dimensions, everything is pretty much identical. The only difference is the record button at the top plate here and the red dial here. Both are now made quite famous by Casey Neistat. The GH5S has dual memory card just like the GH5. They are both UHS 2 V90 high-speed type. The GH5S weighs 660 grams with memory card and battery, so this is about 65 grams lighter than the GH5. I'm assuming most of the weight reduction comes from the lack of the in-body image stabilizer, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the review. Just like the GH5, the GH5S has lots of input and output ports on the camera. You have the 3.5mm mic jack, you have the 3.5mm headphone jack, you have the full-size HDMI socket, you have the USB 3.1 socket, but the 3.5mm mic jack can now take line input as well. So the flash sync port at the front can also be used to synchronize multiple cameras timecode. The biggest thing about the GH5S has to be its 10 megapixel image sensor. It is dramatically lower resolution than all the recent Micro Four Thirds cameras. When the GH series was originally launched, the GH1 and also the GH2, they both have the oversized multi-aspect sensor. But then after that, with the GH3, 4 and 5, Panasonic has gone back to the normal standard size sensor. So with a normal non-oversized sensor, when you are shooting at any aspect ratio apart from 4:3, basically it means it's just cropping from the sensor. So there are two main disadvantages when you do that. The first is you're using a smaller sensor size, so that means the image quality wouldn't be so good. And the second thing is also the focal length would change when you are changing between different aspect ratio. So with the GH5S, Panasonic has bring back this oversized multi-aspect sensor design, which is definitely a very good news because it will give you the best image quality no matter what aspect ratio you are shooting at, and also the focal length of the lens will remain the same, doesn't matter what aspect ratio you are shooting at as well. But there is a drawback that I will talk about slightly later. So when you are shooting at 16:9 aspect ratio, which is what most of the video modes are recorded at, with this oversized multi-aspect sensor, from my calculation, the image sensor, it will be about 20% larger compared to the normal Micro Four Thirds sensor. That means it will give you better image quality and especially better low light performance. So the GH5S is the first Micro Four Thirds camera that can do 14-bit RAW output. All the previous Micro Four Thirds camera, no matter it's from Olympus or Panasonic, they can only do 12-bit RAW output. 14-bit RAW file should capture more information than the normal 12-bit RAW file. So in theory, it should capture better image quality and give you more flexibility during the post-processing. Unfortunately, I don't have a RAW reader right now, so I cannot really test the difference between the 14 and 12-bit RAW file. If you select the 14-bit RAW output and you switch to burst mode, with the AFS setting, you can get 11 frames per second. With the AFC continuous focus tracking, you get 7 frames per second. Now if you drop it back to 12-bit RAW output, then with the AFS mode you get 12 frames per second, and with the AFC mode you got 8 frames per second. And the RAW buffer is at least 60 frames no matter which mode you are shooting at. One thing I'm a bit surprised is, with the GH5, even though the resolution is nearly double that of the GH5S, when you are shooting 12-bit RAW, and with the AFC focus tracking, you can get 9 frames per second, which is actually faster than what you can get with the same setting on the GH5S. The electronic viewfinder on the GH5S is pretty much the same as the one on the GH5. It's 3.68 million dots and the magnification is 0.76 times. However, it now has the 120 Hz refresh rate, which is the same as the G9. So one new thing that the GH5S image sensor has is that it has a dual native ISO design. Well, it's not really new because Panasonic has been doing similar thing to their high-end camcorder for quite a while, but this is the first time they applied it to their Micro Four Thirds image sensor. So what it means is that each pixel on the sensor has 2 circuits connected to it. One circuit is optimized for low ISO performance, while the other circuit is optimized for the high ISO low noise performance. So it depends on what ISO value is used. The sensor will pick the best circuit to give you the optimum image quality. So for the GH5S, the low ISO circuit will be used from base ISO all the way up to ISO 1250. From ISO 1250 onwards, then the other circuit, the one that optimized for high ISO, will be used, and that one will give you better high ISO performance. And because of this and all the other changes to the image sensor design, the maximum ISO is now increased from GH5 25,600 to the new 204,800, which is like 8 times or 3 stops higher than the GH5. So now let's talk about the high ISO performance next. I guess this is probably the most important thing for a lot of people when they are considering the GH5S. Let's talk about the photo mode first. Unfortunately, I don't have a RAW reader to check out the RAW file yet, so I can only talk about the JPEG file. Up to ISO 3200, the camera generated JPEG files still look very nice with all the fine details still retained in the file. From ISO 6400 onwards, the camera JPEG engine seems to start applying a much stronger noise reduction algorithm to the picture, because when you zoom in at 100%, you can start to see the fine details start to disappear from ISO 6400 onwards. Having said that, if you don't need to print out the photo to be really large, even at ISO 12800, the image quality is still pretty usable. At ISO 51200, the image quality really isn't that great, but if I have to shoot at high ISO, I would probably still shoot at 51200. The two extended ISO 102,000 and ISO 204,000 are really reserved for when you're shooting at really dark area. So in other words, I would try to keep the ISO below 50,000 if possible. But think about it, a usable ISO 50,000 from a Micro Four Thirds sensor is pretty damn impressive. So when I compare the 4:3 aspect ratio JPEG from the GH5S and the GH5, I would say the image from the GH5S is about slightly over 1 stop better than the GH5. For video, I would say I could go about 2 stops higher with the GH5S and still get very similar video quality when compared to the GH5. So for example, the video I shot at ISO 51200 with the GH5S is about very similar to what I got at ISO 12800 with the GH5. So that is like almost a 2-stop improvement at very high ISO, and that is very impressive. It seems like in video mode I got almost a 2-stop improvement in high ISO performance, while in photo mode I only got slightly more than 1 stop. I'm assuming it's because of the multi-aspect sensors. So when you're shooting at 16:9 aspect ratio, the GH5S does use a bigger sensor area, so that gives you some extra improvement in the image quality. So I also did some tests to see how the readout speed of the GH5S is like. The original GH5 is actually pretty good already in terms of the rolling shutter performance. So for most of the normal shooting, you probably won't notice any rolling shutter issue with the GH5. Now, I put the GH5 and the GH5S side by side and I did some rolling shutter tests, and I noticed the GH5S seems to have slightly better rolling shutter performance than the GH5. I measure the slope of the vertical line from the identical frame at different time interval. So this is probably the frame that shows the worst rolling shutter issue. With the GH5, the angle is about 10 degrees, and with the GH5S it's about 8 degrees. So it's not like a huge dramatic improvement, but it is still quite a good improvement compared to the GH5. Let's talk about the video mode a little bit more. So the GH5S is just like the GH5. You can record 4K video up to 60 frames per second. It can record 10-bit 422 4K footage internally at 30 frames per second or slower. And it can record 60 frames per second 10-bit 422 footage using an external recorder. There's no cropping when you're shooting in 4K or 1080p mode. So that means you get the full width of the sensor. And because of the multi-aspect sensor, you're actually using a bigger image area when you're shooting with the GH5S, as I already mentioned earlier in this review. Now, when you are recording in Cinema 4K mode, you can now record at 60 frames per second with the GH5S. With the GH5, you can only go up to 24 frames per second. The Vlog is already pre-installed in the GH5S. That means for people who need to use the Vlog, if you buy the GH5S, it's already included in the price. With the GH5 and also the G9, you can do slow motion at up to 180 frames per second at Full HD resolution. With the GH5S, you can now record up to 240 frames per second at Full HD resolution, which is really good. But I noticed one thing is when you are shooting at anything faster than 204 frames per second, the camera will actually crop the video a little bit. While nobody really like cropping, but the cropping actually benefits me a little bit because there were a few days I was out there shooting like birds and other things using the 1260 lens, which is not a particularly long lens. So and I'm shooting birds, you know, they're far away. So when I'm shooting 240 frames per second slow motion videos, the cropping actually make the lens to be slightly longer, which actually benefited me a bit. So yeah, remember when you're shooting anything about 204 frames per second, the camera will apply about 10 or 15% cropping. The GH5S can also shoot anamorphic video just like the GH5, but because the sensor is only 10 megapixel, it cannot shoot the high resolution anamorphic, so it can only shoot the 4K anamorphic video. I talked about the drawback of the oversized multi-aspect sensor a little bit earlier in this review, and what I mean is I believe because this oversized multi-aspect sensor in it, so Panasonic can no longer put the in-body image stabilizer into the GH5S because they ran out of room to do that. So I have to say I'm quite disappointed about that. It's because Panasonic's in-body image stabilizer has become quite good recently since the GH5, and with the GH9 it seems to be even better. So now with no in-body image stabilizer, I feel like the GH5S has lost one of its key features. When shooting photos, probably because of the low resolution output, I could actually get away when shooting at quite low shutter speed and get relatively sharp photos. I feel a bit like the days when I was shooting with the Nikon D700. I could shoot at pretty low shutter speed with no optical image stabilizer and still get very sharp output photos. So the lack of in-body image stabilizer doesn't bother me too much when I'm taking photos. It's when I'm shooting videos that I'm really missing the in-body image stabilizer, because the footage with the dual IS or even just the IBIS from the GH5 is very smooth. So I have a feeling some people will start the conspiracy saying that Panasonic removed the in-body image stabilizer because of whatever reason. But me personally, I believe it's just because of some technical limitation. They just couldn't fit the in-body image stabilizer with the oversized sensor. Maybe in a couple of years time when Panasonic released the G6S, and by then maybe the engineer from Panasonic can figure out how they can keep using the oversized multi-aspect sensor and still can fit the in-body image stabilizer back in the body. But anyway, Panasonic has made it quite clear that the original GH5 is more suitable for handheld shooting, while the GH5S is more for professional video production, where the target user will normally put it on a stable platform like a tripod, or it will be used with a camera rack, so it doesn't require the in-body image stabilizer. So the GH5S has the DFD autofocus system. Now notice the GH5 actually has the advanced DFD while the GH5S has the DFD. So I'm not sure why the GH5S has the older autofocus system. At least on paper, that's what Panasonic told us. When I'm taking photo in real life, I feel like I've repeated myself 100 times already every time I review a Panasonic camera, but the autofocus is lightning fast and accurate. I can't really tell the difference between the 0.07 second from the GH5S and the 0.05 second from the GH5, even when I'm shooting side by side with the two cameras. It's just like when I was reviewing the G9, which actually has a faster 0.04 second than the GH5. I just can't tell the difference between all the three cameras. They are all ridiculously fast. And when I'm shooting photo in the AFC mode, tracking also seems to work quite well. I'm not too sure if it's because of the lower resolution. I seem to get a very high keep rate when I'm shooting moving object using the tracking mode on the GH5S. And Panasonic said the low light autofocus performance has also improved with the GH5S. With the GH5 and also G9, they can both autofocus down to -4 EV, which is already pretty impressive. But now with the GH5S, it can autofocus down to -5 EV. And I have tested the camera and tried to take photo at some pretty dark area. It's so dark that my eye almost can't see anything. And the camera can still autofocus successfully, even though it's slightly slower than normal. So when I'm shooting video, the focus tracking also seems to work very well, very similar to G9. When I was reviewing the G9, I didn't have a chance to test the G9 side by side with the GH5 because I didn't have two of the identical lenses, but I felt like the G9 is quite a bit better when compared to the GH5. So this time when I'm testing the GH5S, I do have two identical lenses. I have two copies of the Leica 1260 lenses, and I have done a lot of side-by-side testing with the GH5 and GH5S next to each other. And after shooting lots and lots of footage, I am quite confident to say that the GH5S does have better autofocus tracking when shooting video when compared to the GH5. The focus tracking with the GH5S just seems to be more accurate, more responsive, and also more consistent. I have done a separate video to show you the difference between the GH5 and GH5S, so I put a link below. You can click on the video to see a longer, more in-depth comparison between the GH5 and GH5S autofocus system. So when you are shooting at very low light environment, one thing you can do is that you can turn on the night mode display on the GH5S. So this is a feature that the Panasonic G9 also has, but when I was reviewing the camera, I actually didn't get the chance to use it a lot. So when you turn on the night mode, what it does is that the camera would turn the display, either the electronic viewfinder or the LCD screen, into a monochrome but in red color and a lot dimmer display. So what it does is that it will make your eyes feel more comfortable when you are switching between looking at the electronic viewfinder or the LCD screen to the real life object. However, one thing I noticed is, so when you are shooting at a very dark area and so you turn on the night mode, so yeah, it's true that the LCD screen or the electronic viewfinder is now a lot dimmer with the red light, so your eye doesn't feel so uncomfortable when you're switching between the looking at through the camera screen and the real life object. However, the green LED light on top of the camera is still lighting up in full intensity, and normally you don't really notice it, but when you are shooting at very dark area, the green light is actually quite distracting. So I think what would be really good is if Panasonic can make it so that when the user turn on the night mode, it will also automatically change the top green LED light, either dim it so it's not really noticeable, or change it to a dim red light, or completely turn it off so It's not so distracting when you are shooting at a very dark area. There are two other changes that has been made to make the GH5S more suitable for nighttime low light shooting. The first one is there's a live view boost. Basically, it would try to boost the image when it's really dark by reducing the frame rate, so that makes it easier for you to see the composition and get the framing everything correct when you're shooting under very low light. And the second one is that they have increased the maximum magnification when you are doing the manual focusing from 10 times to 20 times, so that makes it good when you are say shooting the night sky with lots of stars, so you can manual focus and get this star to be very sharp a lot easier. The GH5S uses the same battery as the GH5, which is the BLF19 battery. The official battery life has improved from GH5 410 shot to 440 shot. However, I don't know whether the same improvement would apply when you are shooting video. But no matter what, GH5S battery life is very good for a mirrorless camera. I was hoping that I can just plug in the USB power source to the camera and use it to charge or power the battery, just like the Panasonic G9. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but at least now I can plug in a USB power supply to the battery charger, and that makes it easier to charge a battery when you're on the road. So when I first heard about the GH5S, frankly I was quite skeptical about it, and I have lots of questions about this new model. Why Panasonic released a new model just 1 year after they released the GH5? Are there enough improvement from the GH5 to make it worth to release a new model? Or would there be too many improvements that make the GH5 owners feel unhappy about it? Now, after using it side by side with the GH5 and use it to shoot photo and video for a couple of weeks, I think I got the answer. The GH5S is clearly not a replacement or upgrade to the original GH5. It is a bit like a twin brother to the GH5, just he was born quite a bit later. They look almost identical from the outside, but the GH5S has quite a bit of different personality. It does something better than the original GH5. For example, the high ISO is better, the autofocus seems to be better, and the slow motion is now 240 frames per second. But on the other hand, there are few things the original GH5 is better. For example, it has the in-body image stabilizer dual IBIS, and it has faster shooting speed, and according to Panasonic, the autofocus system on the GH5 is actually faster. For photo shooters, the 10 megapixel output seems to be a bit low for landscape shooters, but for shooting things like documentary, the new 14-bit RAW output, the better high ISO performance, and the better low light autofocus performance make the GH5S quite a versatile still shooter as long as you don't need the resolution. For videographers, the almost 2-stop improvement in high ISO performance is very impressive. The dual native ISO, the lower resolution, and also the oversized multi-aspect sensor together definitely paid off and quickly improved the low light performance of the GH5S. The autofocus tracking also seems to be quite a bit better when I compare the GH5 and GH5S side by side. The 240 frames per second slow motion video and the high refresh rate electronic viewfinder are also very welcome upgrade. The edited line-in audio input, the pre-installed vlog, the timecode synchronization, the cinema 4K 60 frames per second video, these are all very clear indication that the GH5S is aiming towards the professional video production. Frankly, I'm still quite disappointed that the GH5S doesn't have the in-body image stabilizer, because the in-body image stabilizer on the GH5 and the G9 has been very good. And because of that, I feel the GH5 is still the more versatile camera for most people. When the GH5 was released about a year ago, it was almost the perfect camera at very affordable price, consider what it can do compared to its competitors. If there's anything you can complain about the GH5, it would be 1. The autofocus tracking, and 2. the high ISO performance when compared to some of its competitors. Now with the GH5S, Panasonic has clearly made some improvement in both areas, especially the high ISO performance. While the high ISO performance and the autofocus tracking, I still wouldn't call it class leading. The difference between the GH5S and its competitors are getting very small. But consider the fact that there are lots of things that the GH5S can do, while a lot of its competitors at maybe double the price still can't do. I would say the GH5S is a very attractive video camera. And I have to admit that I wasn't so sure about the Panasonic DFD autofocus technology. Is it the way to go? Even when I was reviewing the Panasonic G9, I was still a bit uncertain. I was thinking maybe Panasonic should consider having the hybrid, with the phase detection and then the contrast detection together. Then that would be quite good. But now, after testing the GH5 and the GH5S side by side, I can see the GH5S has some clear improvement over the original GH5, and the two cameras only 1 year apart. So yeah, Panasonic managed to improve their autofocus tracking quite a lot within a very short period of time. So in the future, when you have even faster processor, faster refresh rate, some improvement to the DFD algorithm, the DFD autofocus system could really match, if not better, than the face detection based autofocus system in the near future. So this is the end of my Panasonic GH5S review. I also have a review on my website with more sample photos and some more in-depth analysis of the camera, so please go and check it out. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't yet, because I have more reviews and other photography related videos coming to my channel in the near future. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Good night everyone. So the GH5S has the DFD autofocus system, and the official autofocus speed is 0.0 milliseconds.